For example, random searching of bags protect riders and workers. We note, too, the crucial importance of sustaining higher ridership in our efforts to improve safety throughout the system. We'll then hear from the Department of Transportation on its fiscal 2025 preliminary budget, which totals $1.4 billion, a decrease of $2.1 million since adoption. The agency's capital budget for the department totals $11.4 billion, committed between fiscal year 24 and 28. The fiscal 2025 preliminary budget includes no new needs for fiscal 2025, a decrease of $39,000 in other adjustments, and $29.7 million in PEGs. As always, I hope to discuss with DOT how the city can more equitably invest across historically underserved communities like the ones I represent. I'll also ask DOT about its recently issued Streets Plan update, in which it was clear that the agency is once again failing to meet the legal mandates the council established several years ago. I look forward to better understanding how this year's budget can ensure DOT can meet legal requirements and more effectively serve communities citywide. Then we will hear from the Taxi and Limousine Commission on its fiscal 2025 preliminary budget, which totals $59.5 million, a decrease of $835,000 since adoption. The new plan includes funding for a budgeted headcount increase of 54 new inspectors. The fiscal 2025 preliminary budget includes $5.4 million in new needs for fiscal 2025. No other adjustments, and $353,000 in PEGs. Over the last decade, this industry has experienced tremendous change, particularly since the introduction of app-based for-hire vehicles in the city. The council remains committed to removing barriers that prevent drivers from earning a living while they provide essential services to New Yorkers. And we look forward to discussing how this budget further empowers drivers to succeed. Finally, we will hear from the Department of Design and Construction on their 2025 preliminary budget, which totals $172.8 million, an increase of $15.4 million since adoption. The fiscal 2025 preliminary budget includes no new needs for fiscal 2025, $650,000 in other adjustments, and $2 million in PEGs. We'll ask DDC about major projects the agency is leading, from borough-based jails to libraries like the how DDC is accomplishing its projects. For example, how the agency is innovating to advance projects more quickly and efficiently, and how DDC is seeking to maximize utilizations of MWBEs. Before we begin with testimony, I would like to thank the council staff for their work, our amazing finance team, including Chima Abachir, a member of District 31, of course, Jack Story, and Michael Sherman, our wonderful committee staff, Mark Chen, Connor Mealy, Kevin Katowski, and John Basile. And of course, my terrific staff, Jack Siegenthaler, my policy and budget director, Kiera Powell, my communications director, and Renee Taylor, my chief of staff. I would also like to acknowledge my fellow council members who are present here today. We are joined by Council Member Lewis, Hanks, Rivera, and Shulman. I will now ask the committee council to go over some procedural items and swear in the representatives from the MTA.
Good morning. I'm Connor Mealy, Counsel to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee of the New York City Council. I would ask that you all raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? For those wishing to testify in person, please see the Sergeant at the Arms at the back of the room and fill out a testimony slip. Even if you have registered online, please still fill out a testimony slip with the sergeants. We would ask that as you begin your testimony, you would identify yourself by your name and title for the record. Thank you very much. You may begin.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, and I want to thank the members for having us here today, especially the chair. We appreciate the continued partnership that we have with you and the committee to make public transportation in New York City the best it can be. So for the record, my name is Rich Davey. I'm the president of New York City Transit. I'm joined by a dream team of folks from MTA. To my right is Jay Patel, the Deputy Chief Financial Officer. To my left, Shanifa Riera, who's our Chief Customer Service Officer, also a policy advisor to all of us. And to John McCarthy, who is our Chief of Policy and External Relations. So we're here, obviously, to testify and to take your questions over these next couple of hours. You know, we're glad to be with you to share an update. Obviously, Chair, you mentioned a number of topics, but principally speaking, we're here at least to talk about our financial position, which is much stronger, I'm pleased to report, than when I was before you a year ago. You'll remember we had been looking at an estimated $2.8 billion deficit that was on track to grow to almost $3 billion by 2026. Well, today that number is zero, and zero over at least the next 5 years. Thanks to Governor Hochul and the state legislature, who really set the bar nationally on what it means to prioritize mass transit. And when I mean nationally, I'm literally giving testimony later today to a number of folks in Massachusetts who are looking at what we did in New York. Folks are saying around the country and looking at what we've done collectively to improve and save our transit system. So we should all be proud of that. The financial lifeline that was provided in the 2023 budget has allowed us to not only keep service running, but we've expanded it significantly while continuing to invest in our network. Let me rattle off a few accomplishments that we've made over the last year. You know, our top priority for riders is frequent, reliable, and safe service, and we've made huge strides on those fronts. Subway service last year was the best it had been in a decade. Obviously, we have more work to do, but the numbers were clear, a best in a decade, and we're setting even higher performance goals in 2024 for our faster, cleaner, safer plan and initiative. Frequencies have improved on 8 subway lines, the C, G, J, MNR 1 and 6, and improving frequencies by about 20 to 25%, typically on nights, weekends, and midday, and there's more to come this summer. Our stations themselves are starting to feel and look more welcoming. Our facilities team has embraced our renovation program. We have completed 68 stations since we launched the program in 2022, and we'll have 110 done by the end of the year. The subway stations are benefiting from deep cleans, brighter lighting, fresh paint, and overall aesthetic improvements that this program delivers. By the way, we're also improving employee facilities back of house, which our customers and folks do not see. For the past year, our station agents have been performing their roles out of the booth for the first time, delivering better service and support by meeting our customers where they are. And not to be forgotten, we've opened 117 bathrooms in 60 stations, restoring an amenity which riders had been lacking since the COVID pandemic. These bathrooms just aren't reopened. They've been deep cleaned, refreshed, upgraded, and a new cleaning cadence is in place to make sure that they continue to be in good condition. We're on pace to reopen the restrooms at a total of 66 stations by the middle of the next year, or this year, excuse me, with final restrooms reopening at the 61st Street in Woodside once the capital project is completed. On buses, we're budgeting to continue increased service as we did by implementing our bus network redesigns. The latest draft of the Queen's Plan invests almost $30 million to create more frequent and direct service throughout our most bus-reliant borough. The plan has been enriched by public feedback, and I'm pleased to say that we will be back out in the field with 17 pop-up events between now and May to continue to get public feedback. As I've often said, we never get these redesigns 100% right, which is it's critically to work with you and your teams and constituents and our customers to make it even better. I am also excited about activating ACE, our automated camera enforcement, on 500 buses on 14 existing routes in May. This will allow us, with plans to add another 30 routes over the next 3 years. The new enforcement powers will enable us to enable buses to ticket cars out of bus lanes that are slowing down service and double parked cars or cars that are blocking bus stops. And an added bonus for safer streets, the cameras will also be able to enforce bike lane violations as well, cars parked in bike lanes. We have seen camera enforcement speeds combined with bus lanes to increase service by 25%. This is time saved for over 2 million New Yorkers who use our bus network every day. We also know the single most powerful tool to speed up buses are dedicated bus lanes and busways. Our buses, as I mentioned, carry over 2 million daily customers, and yet they tend to be, in many respects, the slowest in the nation, sometimes crawling at 6 miles an hour. Bus lanes and bus work, we've seen major improvements, 40% during some peak hours on some of these major corridors. Bus lanes are also a win for safety. When we pair with camera enforcement, we have actually seen a 20% reduction in collisions on routes once bus lanes are implemented. We're also encouraged by the DOT's recent actions on 2nd Avenue to speed up the M15, our highest ridership bus route in the city. We look forward to working with the DOT to continue to implement bus priority, not only lanes, but transit signal prioritization, those clocks that aren't working right now in some bus stops, et cetera. So we look forward to partnering with our friends at the DOT. Customer satisfaction with our paratransit service, our Accessor Ride, has risen dramatically. We always have work to do, but our customers are telling us that service has improved. And our on-time performance is so strong, we've actually tightened the window for how we determine a pickup is on time from 30 minutes, the federal standard, now down to 20 minutes. We're worked hard with our third-party providers to improve their service and performance. We've made booking easier and faster with an app, and we have expanded and will continue to look to expand our on-demand e-hail program to thousands of New Yorkers. Customers have noticed. In January, we reached 79% customer satisfaction, the highest in our history. On subway and bus affordability, equity is also an important issue for us at the MTA. We've been working with the city to expand eligibility to move New Yorkers for its Fair Fares program, which provides, as you all know, a half-price Metro card to low-income New Yorkers and New Yorkers who are struggling economically. The Human Resources Administration is partnering with us to boost enrollment, but we are proud to support that enrollment at every opportunity. I have instituted, since I became president, a transit talk, which gets me out to stations about twice a month across the 5 boroughs. Fair Fares representatives have joined us from the city in those events, and we've successfully also had 2 of our customer service centers, Jackson Heights and Roosevelt Avenue and Coney Island Stillwell, with joint enrollment activities as well. The more we can get the word out to New Yorkers that this is a program available to them, we believe this is good news and will get more folks onto our system. You know, our partners at the railroad have also made progress in affordability too. Last summer, they added a peak option, meaning that traveling within New York City will only cost $7 in addition to the existing off-peak $5 ticket. At the same time, the Long Island Railroad introduced the Far Rockaway ticket, bringing the same benefits as City Ticket to customers at the Far Rockaway station traveling to and from the rest of the city. And notably, we are making progress on subway crime after a difficult January, thanks to the NYPD resources provided by Mayor Adams and the recent resources added by Governor Hochul. There are now an additional 1,000 police officers patrolling our subway system daily, and it's having an impact. Where crime was up 46% at the end of January compared to last year, that number has been pushed down to 18% because February crime was down significantly from 2023. We also know the increase in deployment of NYPD cops is giving riders a peace of mind. We hear it in every survey, and I mean every survey. I am obsessed with getting customer feedback. We get it once a month, and the #1 issues that we hear from our customers are, in order, seeing folks with emotional issues, folks with mental health crises, homelessness, and crime. Make no mistake, though, we have a recidivism issue in our subway system, and the data bears out on that too. 38 individuals arrested for assaulting transit workers last year. Transit workers had a total of 1,126 additional crimes on their records that I can talk about. Addressing the issue of repeat offenders preying on our customers and our workers will go a long way to improving subway safety. We've also taken steps to make our platform safer. We are currently piloting platform barriers at 3 stations, 191st on the 1, Morgan Ave on the L, and Clark Street on the 2 and the 3, with Fifth Avenue on the 7 coming soon, this low-cost, creative solution will improve customer safety while they wait for their train on the platform. Working with Governor Hochul, we've also made substantial progress in addressing a core concern of customers and all of New Yorkers, those individuals in our subway system with the most acute mental health needs. As I mentioned, the top issue for our subway customers in our monthly surveys. For the past several months, we've quietly piloted 2 subway co-response outreach or SCOUT teams, pairing Department of Mental Health and mental hygiene clinicians with MTA PD to great success. We've helped dozens of New Yorkers in need get the mental health care and supportive housing they need. The governor has now tasked us with increasing this pilot to 10 teams, which will be coming online later this year. Customers will be glad to see that we're equipping subway cars and stations with better lighting and more security cameras. More than 1,100 cameras are now on our trains, which are helping NYPD identify perpetrators and solve crimes. And all the new R211s, I have to say, Madam Chair, the R211s are on the A line, also come with cameras built in as well. And speaking of the R211, we proudly debuted the open gangway R211T on the C line last month. These new trains are a bold step forward for New York City and the first of their kind in the United States. We've heard rave reviews from our customers so far during their first month in service. We've also shifted into high gear on our After a brief pause to address a gearbox issue, we now have 12 new R211 trains running on the A line, replacing the 50-year-old R46s. And for riders in Staten Island, we're currently testing the R211s out there and hope to enter the first train into service in the coming weeks, if not months. Improvements in performance, safety, and cleanliness have helped tremendously in bringing riders back. Paid ridership on subway is roughly 70% of pre-COVID levels, and it's about 75% on the railroads. But these numbers don't consider customers who ride without paying the fare, and we know there are many. Indeed, if you look at and include non-paying riders, we're actually closer to 82, in some instances 85% of pre-COVID subway and bus ridership. So fare and toll evasion represent a very large threat to our fiscal health going forward. We're implementing some recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Panel to make enforcement more equitable, which I fully support. We're piloting more accessible wide aisle gates at 4 subway stations, including an entire fare array at Sutphin Archer and JFK Airport. We've continued our deployment of unarmed guards at emergency gates, a program that continues to pay for themselves and more. And we're adding more Eagle Team members. Civil fare enforcement members have been hired, and we've changed how they're deployed. We now have them on a bus hub model that is strategic in enforcing fare payment where it has lagged. More personnel also brings the added benefit of more eyes and ears in the system to report issues to the station team and the NYPD, and our customers feel safer as a result. We're also pushing for a refreshed approach to fare evasion fines in this year's budget. This new proposal would replace the standard $100 fine with a new laddered approach where first-time offenders would be warned before fines issued. Critically, this new model would make fare enforcement more equitable. We want New Yorkers to pay their fare, not a fine. And by enrolling those who are eligible in fair fares or our reduced fare program automatically and returning half of that $100 fine to the customers in the form of a $50 credit to an Omni card to use in our system. This is an equitable, responsible approach to fare enforcement, and we hope your peers in Albany include this in the final budget. Fare compliance is critical to preserving our balanced budget and into the future. In the same respect, in 2023, we committed to $400 million in operating efficiencies this year as part of our overall effort to deliver fiscal sustainability. Thanks to some incredible work across the MTA, we've actually exceeded that goal and are already on track to reach $500 million in efficiencies by 2025 without cutting headcount and without cutting service. And we're doing it while providing significantly more commuter rail service and subway service, and obviously operating a major new terminal at Grand Central Madison and implementing our new bus network redesigns. But here's the kicker. Even with all that service that we've added on subway, bus, and commuter rail that I've described, all of which is accounted for in our 5-year financial plan going forward, in real inflation-adjusted dollars, the MTA budget has actually gone down by 3% since 2019. Chair Lieber says it all the time, but I can't reinforce it enough, that this is a new MTA. We're making good on our commitment to change the way we do business. We're growing ridership, improving and increasing service, reducing our costs, pursuing and pushing transit equity. These are our top priorities. Even our approach to expanding the transit system reflects this intense focus on cost containment. Where we can, we look for ways to expand the system, not by building new tunnels or systems from scratch, but by getting more out of our existing infrastructure. But I can tell you, cost consciousness alone will not fund the transit system New Yorkers want and New Yorkers deserve. So I ask you, do you like those new R211s? How about our efforts to convert all of our 6,000 buses to zero emission by 2040? New signal systems that allow us to run more frequent and reliable service like we do in the 7 line? The fare gates of the future? Honoring our commitment to make almost every subway station ADA compliant? Well, funding for these projects relies to a significant extent on revenue generated from the forthcoming congestion pricing. MTA is doing what is necessary to prepare for the implementation, including increasing service and installing tolling infrastructure. We did a 4,000-page, 4-year-long environmental process, including 30-plus hearings and outreach events, which earned federal approval, putting us in a position to turn on the system in a few months once we resolve the pro-traffic lawsuits brought by our neighbors in New Jersey and a few other litigants. The MTA has been very clear that if there are any delays to congestion pricing, we will have to push back schedules on important projects. So, for example, more than 20 ADA stations are at risk across the boroughs, 5 stations in the Bronx, from Mott Haven to Kingsbridge to Wakefield, Briarwood and Jamaica and Queens, southern Brooklyn stations such as Bensonhurst and Coney Island, as well as Nostrand Ave at the intersection of Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, plus major complexes like 42nd Street at Bryant Park and Lexington Ave and 59th Street. The modern signal systems that were promised on 6 subway lines on hold right now for 1.5 million A and C and BDFM riders, all the way out to Far Rockaway and up to the Bronx and Eastern Queens. That's more than the ridership in the next 5 largest subway systems in the country combined. I could keep going on and on with the impacts to the critical state of good repair and resiliency work that would ensure reliability of our service, new rolling stock for all of our agencies, our zero emissions bus program, and even the 2nd Avenue subway phase 2. Last month, we put out a full list of what's at stake so folks can get a better understanding, but we do not want to see that happen. Before I conclude, I also want to salute our workforce at New York City Transit. For those who don't know, next Monday, March 18th, is Transit Worker Appreciation Day across the United States. Every day, 47,000 person workforce at New York City Transit steps up to keep our city moving. They are the force that powers the lifeblood of our city, and we are extraordinarily grateful for the work they do. However, in recent weeks, our city has seen several unacceptable attacks on workers who were just doing their job in serving New York. This is unconscionable. No one should go to work fearing for their safety. We are doing everything in our power at MTA to keep our frontline workers safe, and our partners at NYPD are also doing a hell of a job quickly identifying and arresting perpetrators. But we also need a criminal justice system that recognizes the severity of assaulting transit workers who, again, are just doing their job. We will continue to be relentless in pursuing measures to keep our people safe and to ensure that those who dare prey on hardworking employees, from subway conductors and bus operators to cleaners and station agents, that those folks face justice. My ask of this body, and anyone listening today, is that next time you're in our system, thank a transit worker for their hard work, celebrate them as we come up to Transit Worker Appreciation Day, and recognize them for their immense contributions in keeping the city moving. We've made huge strides in recent years, but there are new and bigger issues facing our agency. With your support, we will keep tackling them and seek to make improvements. I've learned in 20 years in this business, the job is never done. We look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the partnership of the MTA and always keeping the lines of communication open. Whether we agree on issues or not, it's always good to know we have someone at the table that is willing to partner. So thank you for that. And my thoughts and prayers remain with the train conductor that was unfortunately met with violence while just doing his job, which was moving New Yorkers to their destination. And so we just want to make sure that we convey that message as well. I'm just going to ask you questions, and I'm going to pause my questions and allow some of my colleagues to ask theirs. But before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we have also been joined by Councilmember Krishnan, Wrestler. Start with the new capital plan. The 2019 to 2024 capital plan is coming to a close, and the new 2025 to 2029 plan will be released later this year. Can you give the committee a preview of how the MTA is establishing its priorities for the new capital plan?
Sure. I mean, at broad brush, it's a couple things. One is really focusing on the state of good repair of all of our systems, right? So ensuring that we're investing in the core of our system. I always say it's sort of the unsexy work of what we do. It's the stuff that we don't see. It's track, signal, power. Rolling stock, obviously, we see our back shops, for example. Some are old, literally trolley barns that have been converted into bus depots, for example. All of that work needs to be done. And so that'll be a big part of what you see. I think, expansion, Second Avenue Subway, IBX, obviously those are important projects. They tend to get the high profile, reports, and the media, tends to report on those. But the vast majority of our work is going to be to continue to invest in the core of our system. I think for some, saying the summer of hell is a triggering moment. We do not want to return to that, and the way you return to that is by not investing in the core of our system. So that said, we're also investing in things like ADA accessibility, right? We have a commitment which, Chair Lieber has made clear that we are going to meet, is to look to make 95% of our subway stations accessible by 2055, and to see if we could even accelerate that. We're proud that we've done more in this last capital plan than the three previous, I think, combined. We have a lot of work to do on rolling stock. While we're doing great strides on the R211s, we're still running, trains that are applying for the AARP cards, if you will, and we need to get those out of service. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but the principal focus of our capital plan will be investing in the core of the system. I don't know if, John, you might want to say something else, please.
Yeah, Chair, I would just point, recently we released our 20-year needs assessment, which is a deep dive into what is needed to keep the system in a state of good repair and how to modernize it. It's probably the most thorough that's ever been done at the MTA, and we'll make sure to share this with the committee and the staff too. But what this is basically is a roadmap of what needs to get done, as Rich said. And so in the coming months, we'll cull from this with our funding partners and others to see what needs to be done in the immediate future, which would build the 5-year capital program.
Thank you for that. And how will congestion pricing support the authority's major projects over the new planned period?
Well, right now we're focused on the current plan, right, to support that. So about $1 billion raised will allow us to use about $15 billion, in bonding capacity to invest in the things that I mentioned in my testimony, right? So we've had to defer, for example, modernizing our signal system on the A, C, BDF, and M, which is critical. It might not sound like a lot, but a modern signal system allows us to run shorter headways, i.e. more service, like we can do on the 7 and the L lines, for example, where we can safely run, at rush hour on the 7, we're running service every 2.5, 3 minutes. We can't do that on some of these other lines because the signal system is antiquated. As I mentioned before, we've had to defer to some extent our zero-emission bus program. We have a huge commitment to convert our buses, which, are hybrid, but in the past have been diesel, in neighborhoods, environmental justice community neighborhoods, that we need to be converting those depots to allow for electric or hydrogen, as the case may be, but to purchase 6,000 buses over the next 15 years. We've had to defer some of that, unfortunately, as well. Those are the kinds of programs or projects that congestion pricing will support in this current capital plan.
So how much of the plan will be dedicated to new projects and how much is dedicated to the state of good repair and maintenance?
I don't think we've made that determination yet, but look, I think on average, it's about an 80-20 split. I've seen that as a general matter, but we haven't made that determination. But as I said, the core, the vast majority of the focus for our upcoming plan, I know will be state of good repair, investing in the core of our system. That said, IBX and Second Avenue Subway are important expansion projects, but there's a lot of other work we need to do to continue to keep our service reliable.
And as you mentioned, the IBX, how will the governor's executive budget proposals for implementation studies related to IBX and Second Avenue Subway be used to perform capital planning and funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think those, obviously those, we're certainly in the early stages of IBX, for example. I think, we're probably in inning 1 of a 9-inning game to understand, exactly how this is going to proceed, for sure. I think we've certainly had some preliminary studies which have identified alternatives that are favorable, like light rail versus bus, for example. But there's work to be done, right? Even in these kinds of projects that you might be using existing right-of-way, for example, to leverage right-of-way, there's still environmental studies that have to occur, obviously community input as well. John, anything else?
Yeah, and I would just add, Chair, that in the executive budget, particularly with Second Avenue Subway going west, it allows us to look at the project that we're putting forward now on Second Avenue Subway going up to 125th Street and not preclude work that would allow us to advance it to the west. So, which, allows for possible savings in future construction of that project.
And as we think about cost shifts also, in recent years, there have been a number of cost shifts increasing New York City's liability to the MTA. And I just want to emphasize increase the city's liability, because I think other parts of the state sometimes do not acknowledge the contributions of New York City. These costs include $60 million in additional payroll mobility tax payments on behalf of the city, as well as $613.6 million in payments related to paratransit. Does the MTA believe that there will be a need for additional cost shifts in the future?
I mean, at this point, we're projecting a 5-year budget with 0 budget deficits. So certainly no, not in the next 5 years. But, I think, I won't get into the sort of the back and forth between the city and state, but I think, what it reflects is a commitment, which we appreciate, the city's commitment to understanding how important public transit is to the city's economic health. And so, as those, takes and puts have occurred over time, again, we appreciate the partnership, but at this point, no. We're projecting a 5-year, budget that does not have deficits attached to it.
And in the event of a surplus, would the MTA support reducing the city's liabilities?
I mean, if we were able to get a surplus, I think we'd probably look at a few things. I mean, would we look at adding service, for example? Could we invest in, the fare programs we discussed? I mean, I think there's probably a lot of opportunities. I will tell you this, Chair. I think folks know I've been here now 2 years, and I spent time I see employees once a month for breakfast to see what's going on, how they're doing. And I had a woman who had been at the authority for 33 years. I saw her last year, and I said, "You've been here 33 years. How many budget crises have you been through?" She said, 33. So, to say that there's a possibility of a surplus is I think people would say we were dreaming a year or two ago, but we would work collaboratively with this body, the mayor and his team, obviously the governor and her team, to think about the best way to invest that. Some might say pay down debt. Some might say, accelerate an ADA station or two. I mean, there's probably lots of worthy things to think about.
So in summation, there'll probably be no foresight in us reducing the city's liabilities. We would
What I'm
just
saying is there'd be a
shift how
lot
we
of
spend.
tugs of priorities, no doubt. Perhaps people sitting even behind me who might say how we should spend that. And I think that would be an open conversation that we would have.
I'd also like to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Narcisse. Going to shift now to subway safety. The governor recently announced the deployment of 750 members of the New York National Guard and 250 personnel from the state police and MTA to patrol subways and conduct bag checks. Can you talk about how the decision was made to install additional state law enforcement in the subways?
Sure. So maybe just taking a quick step back, that was one of a 5-point plan that the governor announced, and I know that has gotten the most attention, but I think it's worth talking a little bit about that and then the other 4 pieces that the governor announced. So she did allow for additional state resources, as you said, which we can talk about in a moment in terms of people. We're also concerned about the recidivism, which I mentioned in my testimony, and the governor's very much focused on looking at individuals who are convicted of assaults within our system, potentially banning those folks from our system, that they have forfeited their ability to use our system if they're assaulting customers or employees. That's another. Cameras have been a big part of the governor's strategy to improve safety in our system. And so not only, as I mentioned, are we putting cameras in our subway cars, so if there's misbehavior or worse, we can catch those perpetrators. We're also putting now cameras in the conductor cab. So as you mentioned, Chair, you know, that conductor who was brutally assaulted a couple weeks ago, I won't get into details. We're working closely with NYPD, but having a camera at that location where the conductor was located certainly would have helped the investigation. And so we're installing cameras there as well. Governor's bringing together the district attorneys to talk about prosecuting or otherwise how they're handling cases against our employees and customers. And the one I mentioned in particular is the Scout team, really focusing in on those New Yorkers who have acute mental health issues and getting them the services that they need. So that was the 5-point plan. Now, as it relates to National Guard and state police in the system, I think the governor was looking for ways to support the tremendous work that NYPD is doing and does every day in our system, and augmenting that with these individuals for bag checks, but also to continue to be eyes and ears in our system. So, you know, we're working cooperatively, obviously, with those 2 entities to deploy them in appropriate ways. But I think that is the overall thinking, that it was part of an overall package to improve safety in our subway. Shanifa?
I mean, and I just, again, would want to reiterate one of the points that President Davey mentioned. Again, we are constantly engaging with our customers and riders, whether it's through surveys or even being, users of the systems ourselves, and we are constantly hearing of the need and ask to have uniform presence. So as President Davey said, this is just one of many components that we are looking to address, customer safety concerns.
Have the deployed National Guard and state police been trained in mental health services? And if so, what kind of training have they received?
Not that I'm aware of, but if they see someone in distress, right, the goal is, and our station agents, by the way, and our station staff also haven't been trained, but what folks know is if they do see someone who is exhibiting either distress on themselves, that they're to call the Scout team and have the trained clinician come and look at and otherwise evaluate what that person's behavior is to see if they qualify. So I think the point is having trained clinicians is been tremendously valuable that we've done over the last several months, and I think that's why the governor's asked us to expand that program. John?
Yeah, and the chair, the officers that are assigned to those Scout teams that go around with the trained clinicians, they are trained separately for those situations. So those officers who are assigned and will be in those situations do receive a special training.
So they do receive training if they're assigned
assigned to the Scout teams. And now the governor has
But only if they're on Scout, but if they're not in
if they're
Scout,
on
but they're
Scout,
just,
they have a whole host of regular training that NYPD does for their officers and the MTA PD that does for their officers that, deals with interactions with the public, but they are not trained in the way a clinician obviously
are
is
this,
trained.
those that are in, those who are labeled as Scouts, are they at every one of the stations that you're having law enforcement at?
No, that's a very specialized team, and it's growing. Where the law enforcement, whether it's state police, MTA police, NYPD, they all have, varying degrees of training, but Guard and state police will not be having those interactions. They will not be doing that work.
And do we have, and just going back to the other point you made, President Davey, in terms of the 5-point plan, do we have any evidence historically that banning people from the subway would improve safety? And how does the MTA expect such a provision could be enforced?
Sure. I don't think we have much evidence because I'm not sure it's been used nearly as enough as we would like, to say the least. How would it be used? I mean, it would simply be we would alert our stations teams to folks. I mean, the stations team actually have a good sense of who maybe hangs out in their station, who may have issues that need to be addressed either by law enforcement or by mental health. I mean, they know better than probably all of us in this room. But I mean, the bottom line is if they're banned and they're coming into the system, you don't have to wait for them to commit a crime, right? They are trespassing, and as a result, they can be ejected from the station. I mean, I feel strongly about this. I think that there are folks who, we have one individual who assaulted 4 transit workers last year and was probably on his way to assault a 5th because he had a metal rod in his hand as he was going into a station. Like, I think that individual certainly needs a lot of help, and I hope he's getting it. But at the same time, I think he's probably forfeited his ability to ride our system for a period of time because he has shown a proclivity to attack people. As I said, I feel strongly about that. Obviously, there's law enforcement and laws that need to be addressed in that regard, but to me, it's common sense.
You mentioned in your opening statement that you have received feedback from customers that they want to see more police officers in the subway. Can you elaborate on this feedback?
Sure. I would encourage you all to look at our website and go to our KPI section, our key performance indicators. We do a monthly survey. We do a deep dive every 6 months of our customers. We get about 100,000 responses. But every month, we get several thousand responses from bus, subway, paratransit customers, usually about 600 to 1,000, what we call a pulse check to see, what's on their mind. And what is consistently on our subway customers' mind is, we ask them the question, what are your concerns, or what can we do to make you ride more? And the answer is, address folks who have who are emotionally disturbed, homelessness, and crime. Those are the top 3 issues consistently since we've been asking these questions. I think it was June of 2022. And then what we further ask folks is, do you believe that there is enough police? It's sort of a Goldilocks, too hot, too cold, or just right. And what we consistently see and have seen over the last few months is customers saying that they want to see more police again. That had improved probably 6-8 months ago when there was a surge last year. As that surge changed and as crime, particularly in January, went up, and it was certainly covered by the media, I think what we saw is customers saying we want to see more police back in our system. So, I mean, that's the data. Again, happy to share with you, but it is publicly available. We share it once a month at our transit committee. Shanifa's team is the one that actually conducts the surveys on our behalf, which we appreciate.
Yeah, and the survey, again, is one insight of how, we're getting feedback from our customers. We have contact centers and call centers. And of course, our shy riders who use social media to give us feedback. So there is a constant loop of customer engagement and feedback in addition to the surveys.
Thank you for that. I'm curious in terms of out of the subway stations, how many of them have the deployment of these additional law enforcement agents? And out of those selected stations, one, how were the stations selected? And two, are those stations where you actually see the crime happening? Like, are you looking at data to determine what stations, or are you just kind of throwing them at the stations?
Yeah, obviously, we're still sort of working through that. I mean, this was announced less than a week ago or about a week ago. But that's typically how we, work with NYPD, for example, on deployment of resources, prioritizing cameras, for example, prioritizing gate guards, obviously prioritizing here as well. It's typically a few things: the volume, so the size of the station and the number of ridership. As Shanifa mentioned, customer complaints. Customers are our best eyes and ears to see if there are issues. To your point, crime that's occurring as well, fare evasion as well. So I think all those things are how we determine how resources are deployed, including the most recent.
I'm sorry, but the deployment is not based on fare evasion. The deployment is based on the crime, correct?
It's based on all the above, is what I just said. So it's all of those characteristics: customer feedback, crime, volume of customers, the size of the particular station. You need more bodies, for example, to cover a large station, even though crime might be high or low. So it's all of the above is what we use to deploy all of the resources that we have. John?
Yeah, and the relationship we have with the NYPD, it's a great relationship where we are sharing information like never before. And one of the things we share is a lot of the information that comes into Shanifa's team from the customers about quality of life issues. We're now able to get that over to the NYPD. So that becomes part of their deployment. So it isn't even just crime numbers. It's really about what issues our customers, our workers are facing, and that free flow of information. So, and one other thing I would add, Chair, on the 2 years ago when the governor announced with the mayor the Cops Camera and Care initiative, one of the important measures in adding MTA police to certain stations, it frees up NYPD officers to do other work. So that's where you're seeing the added enforcement, the added officers. It makes others available to do other work throughout the system.
Does the MTA Police and National Guard intend to follow reporting requirements set out in the council's How Many Stops Act? And if not, are the demographics of the stops and bag checks being tracked in any form, and will that data be made public?
So yes, the MTA PD has guidelines similar to the NYPD, and any guard or state police will not be doing that work. This is any bag check according to those rules will be done by the MTA PD. The role of the additional uniforms is really to serve the purpose of allowing these officers to focus, the MTA PD and the NYPD focus on these other items like the weapons checks and the like. So yes, we will follow the same rules, but that will be done by the MTA PD. It won't be done by the Guard or State Police.
So the guards won't be the ones that are checking the bags. They're just standing to be the eyes, while the MTA Police is the ones that's doing the function of checking the bags?
Correct, and they have very strict criteria.
And
That's
is that
consistent.
information made public in terms of what those stops look like?
I'll check on that, but I believe so.
Okay, if
It's
you could get back to us
Sure.
while we're here. I also want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Majority Leader Farias, and I'm going to pause. I am going to come back to this piece, but I want to pause to allow the opportunity for my colleagues to ask questions. We are going to start with Councilmember Lewis, followed by Councilmember Hanks.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, President Davey. Thank you for being here today. In your testimony, you mentioned endeavors for a faster, cleaner, and safer service. In Flatbush, not only is the 2 and 5 line not safe due to crime, but we also have major capital deficiencies that fall on deaf ears when we call to make requests for repairs for broken steps for over a year now, and flooding that causes safety concerns for some of our constituents. So I'll start with this. The B41 bus has been inconsistent with service, and it has residents concerned about the Brooklyn bus network redesign. and how that could further leave travelers stranded. So we wanted to know, how is the MTA taking this into consideration to ensure frequency isn't reduced for our older adults and residents with disabilities who rely on the bus to travel to important destinations like medical appointments and travel for older adults that go to senior centers and shopping across central Brooklyn. The second question is the constant delays at the Brooklyn College Flatbush Avenue terminal that causes a major impact on economic and social viability of Flatbush and travelers, which frequently we hear about complaints being held. The trains are held in between stations, causing commuters to be late. We wanted to know, does the MTA have any plans to resolve the chronic issues between Brooklyn College, Newkirk Avenue, going towards Church Avenue? And this has been going since I've been elected into this seat for the last 4 years. It's been the same issue. And last but not least, we have communicated with the MTA on safety issues on Flatbush and Glenwood with pedestrians and buses colliding, causing fatalities due to confusing signal patterns and multiple buses being back-to-back on the blocks of Flatbush and Glenwood, with multiple deaths that occur recently and publicly for everyone to see. So we wanted to know, how is the MTA taking this into consideration, the concerns to resolve these issues, as the bus network redesign has no notes about this bus stop. This is at the B6, which is between Flatbush and Glenwood. And is the MTA considering the conflicts with the redesign and the intersections in Council District 45? And the chair has been to the district to see these corridors, which are bustling intersections, but we have the highest fatalities due to buses colliding with pedestrians. That happens quite often. And just a quick highlight, if you can provide on the pilot program for the free bus route on the B60, the new bus route, we wanted to know if that will be increased to other areas like the Canarsie Flatlands and Mill Basin area. Thank you.
I want to compliment you on getting those questions in 3 minutes. So but let me take a few at a time. And I should start by saying, I'm happy to come out to your district and take a look at these specific places with you, so we can arrange that for sure. On the B41, so maybe just take a quick step back. So on the Brooklyn bus redesign, that is sort of next in line, as you know. We're maybe behind Queens. Queens is where Brooklyn is following. Although we are out with public comment right now, I would say in the Bronx and Queens, the bus redesign that we put out as a draft is never the final that we implement. So we want your feedback. We want your constituents' feedback. They're going to know the bus routes certainly better than me, and we want to get that feedback from folks. Whether it's inappropriately eliminating a bus stop, for example, near a senior center, that has come up from time to time. We obviously don't want to do that. Relative to the B41, I would say, I think on Flatbush Avenue in particular, I was out there, 18 months ago, I love bus lanes as a general matter. I know that might be unpopular for some folks. I happen to like bus lanes, and so, we have a bus lane proposal out on Flatbush Avenue. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to pedestrian safety, I know you were talking, I think, about the B6, but as it relates to pedestrian safety, what we've seen is for areas where there are bus lanes, it is just safer. It's safer when colliding with cars and also having challenges with pedestrians as well. I think the bus redesign does take that into account. I think part of what we're trying to do is look at where we have bus stops and, can we reduce, for example, right-hand or left-hand turns? Can we ensure that the buses are going straight by nature? That is just a safer route as opposed to needing to take a left or a right. I think all those things. We're also looking at pedestrian warning systems. We have this in some of our buses now, but warning pedestrians if the bus is turning, for example. And then lastly, I would tell you, just from a safety perspective, I think this is a twofer for us, is, we've been investigating being able to fully enclose our bus operators in a full cockpit to prevent them from being assaulted. At the same time, what that's going to allow us to do is install e-mirrors, literally, cameras that are substitute for mirrors, and they are much, much clearer, particularly in inclement weather. And so, to your point, we are looking at ways to make our operations safer. And then, finally, you mentioned the issues of the 2 and the 5. Happy to have a conversation I have my line managers in next week so we can see how we can improve those terminal operations. But as I said, and I make this offer, blanket offer to all of you and your colleagues to the extent I know, I think Councilmember Narcisse invited me out last year, and we had a good walk around. Happy to come out to your districts and see these issues for myself.
We'll take the offer, and
Great.
if you want to do a joint effort between myself and Councilwoman Narcisse about the B41, we'll take it.
Happy
I just wanted to quickly highlight the collisions happen on the B6 route that collides with the B44, which has a bus lane.
Got it.
That is the problem. And we actually rejected the B44 route. This is when I was a staffer. There was another council member there at the time, because we knew this would happen. And now, 4 years later, we have a lot of fatalities. The same issue happens at Flatbush Avenue and Avenue H, which the chair came out for a walkthrough on that, and we still haven't heard back from MTA on that. So it'd be great to have conversations about the warning signals that you mentioned and a walkthrough.
Yeah, let's do that. So I don't know, apologize if someone hasn't been getting back to you, but the answer is I'll come out and let's look at it together, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. How are you? My name is Camila Hanks. I am the council member of the 49th District, which is the North Shore of Staten Island. And I'm excited about the R211's launch on Staten Island, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. I had to Google it, but I'm looking forward to it.
The good news is we didn't buy used trains. These are new, which Staten Island has been waiting for way too long, so.
Longer than I've been alive.
Indeed.
And I'm 52. So, thank you, council member. My question really revolves around the congestion pricing, and I kind of wanted to read out some stats for you that have come about our research. So there are 4 zip environmental justice areas. That's 10301, 02, 03, and 10. All of this in my district. Those demographics of those 4 zip codes are over 50% Black and Hispanic, with an average household income of $62,000. Contrary, there are 12 zip codes in the central business district, when you're talking about congestion pricing, that are not in environmental justice areas, and they are less than 20% Black and Hispanic, and the average household income is $300,000. So being an outer borough council member, maybe it speaks to some of my colleagues who are in Queens who are also contending with what the impact, the environmental impact that congestion pricing are going to have on these outer boroughs. We have many teachers, firefighters, people who have no choice but to leave Staten Island to earn a living. And this congestion pricing, which you were proud to say will raise over $1 billion. And my question is, at what cost to the outer boroughs? At what cost to vulnerable populations? And at what cost to people who are trying to earn a living who do not have a choice and do live in transportation deserts? Thank you.
Sure. So a couple things. I mean, number one, I think we all know that congestion pricing is the law of the land, right? It was passed 5 years ago by the state legislature, signed by the governor. So, we are the implementer of the law at MTA. 2 is, I don't have those statistics you read in front of you, but I can tell you, as a New Yorker, I've lived in Hell's Kitchen for the last 2 years.
These environmental impacts came from the MTA's report, not ours.
Yeah, right. A report that ultimately substantiated that congestion pricing should go forward. So that said, my neighbors in Hell's Kitchen tell me that they've been pushing hard for the last number of decades to get something like congestion pricing because it is a diverse community, very different, incomes and households, but, a traffic choked around the Lincoln Tunnel, for example. As mentioned, for me, at least as New York City Transit president, it's an opportunity to invest in transit. I'm not sure, certainly there are subway deserts in the city. We run service all over the place, so to say that there are transit deserts, I might take issue with, but happy to have a separate conversation on that. most folks that travel into the central business district, the vast majority, I think 90%, are taking public transit. We hope we can move a few more of those folks out of their cars and into public transit to get into the central business district. But, I would just say that, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? There are some folks who are certainly not happy with congestion pricing. We've heard that, but it is the law of the state of New York. We went through an exhaustive process. The MTA board is still considering maybe tweaks to that and have heard as recently as 2 weeks ago from the public in that regard. But I am of the personal opinion that it should go forward, and it should go forward as quickly as it can.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Rivera, followed by Councilmember Shulman.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
All right, we can start with congestion pricing. I have a few questions. I'll try to get them all in and then take it from there. So thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your work. I'm very excited about some of the initiatives that you've mentioned. My district is entirely within Manhattan, below 60th Street, or the tolling zone for congestion pricing. My constituents will be uniquely impacted by the congestion bill, both for potential benefits and the costs. The congestion toll will be used for MTA's capital plan. So can you provide any projects that will be supported by these funds that will improve the transportation network that's actually within the congestion zone? And I've also received concerns that our goals for reducing congestion, they won't be successful unless we redesign our streets to increase biking and pedestrian infrastructure. Street redesign is not in the purview of the MTA, like it is with DOT, and we'll hear from them later. And the funds raised will not be contributed to these projects per se, the street redesign for cyclists and pedestrians. Do you have any plans to collaborate with DOT on these street redesigns? Is it possible to use congestion toll funds for these purposes?
So to the first question, sure, there are lots of projects that we will fund that will benefit folks within the congestion zone, right? So as mentioned earlier, right now we're delayed on our signal projects for the AC, BDF, and M, obviously, which serve folks within the central business district as an example. Other than the 7 and the L line, which have modern signal systems from across both of those lines, that's a major improvement we need to make across the entire system, so it would benefit all 4 boroughs, not just folks living below 60th Street, but that's critical. New rolling stock is another one, so new subway cars, right? I know you take the service, and some of them are quite new, and some of them really need to have a retirement party. And congestion pricing will allow us to fund those kinds of projects in the future as well. I mean, I think it's fair to say that congestion pricing will benefit folks across the 5 boroughs in terms of transit improvements, but for folks within the district, absolutely. On the second question, we obviously collaborate with DOT all the time on whether it's bus lanes or improvements around cycling and walking. As to who pays for what, I can't speak to that, but certainly we would collaborate with the commissioner and his team, as we do, around improvements for bus and for street.
Just my last question is somewhat related. The 2nd Avenue redesign, what input did MTA have of this redesign? What goals does the MTA hope to achieve with the redesign? And just, you mentioned the L. You've announced subway barriers at the 3rd Avenue L station, not the ones we've seen, not the yellow ones and not the other ones. They're supposed to be the sort of state-of-the-art, more advanced, used in other countries' barriers. So I'd like to know the status of that. And along the L too, the elevators. Is there a timeline for a fully accessible L train? And just squeeze in one last question. So she can't actually punish me for this. Thank you. All right, so you got those, right? 2nd Avenue redesign, 3rd Avenue L station, the L line being fully accessible with elevators, but the barriers at 3rd Avenue specifically in terms of the timeline. And for cleanliness, how do you determine which stations get cleaned? Is it complaint driven? Is it ridership? Is it both? And thank you.
So let me unpack. I appreciate that, the round robin, a lot of questions. So a couple things. On the Second Avenue, yes, we often talk to the DOT, staff to staff. I talk to the commissioner on a regular basis on major issues, but we were a part of those conversations. I mean, for me, the goal is to improve speed. Fundamentally, we talked a lot about what our subway customers are telling us in terms of why they aren't riding. What our bus customers are telling us is they want more reliable service with shorter wait times. And in part, that's about improving bus speed. So my hope is that the M15 will improve its reliability as a result of that redesign. It's, as I said, one of the largest, if not the most frequently used bus service in the city. So that's important. How we determine cleaning? We have... Well, we hired 800 station cleaners last year. How many total we have on? I'll have to get back to you, but we clean every station every day. So it's not as if there are customer complaints, for example, of course, I'm on the service frequently, and if I see a spill or something that may have just occurred right after a cleaner was there, we get that information in. But I am proud to say that what we are hearing from our customers is that they are seeing cleaner stations, brighter stations, as a result of not only the great work our cleaning staff is doing. We bought them new, I call them Zambonis, those new scrubbers. We bought 100 new ones last year. It's our job as management to do, give them the tools to get the job done. And I don't think we had done a very good job of that in the last couple of years. On the barriers that you mentioned, so, maybe I'm to blame for these or to be thanked, I don't know. It's probably 50-50. But, we did receive vendor proposals last month for these new platform screen doors, right? Those are expensive, and they won't fit in every station for a bunch of reasons. And I would say, too, at least in my experience, you don't often see those retrofitted. They're part and parcel in Japan when they built those lines, or Singapore, or the one line in London, by the way. It's not. So we said to the staff, look, why wait? Are there other things we can do that are within our control that we can put out immediately to help our customers feel safer and, to stand behind a barrier, trip for that matter? We've seen folks, drop a cell phone into the tracks because they're too close and climb down and get the cell phone. I mean, it's crazy. Please don't do that. We have staff that can do that for you. So to me, it's an all the above kind of an approach. So we're going to move forward with the platform screen doors, as you mentioned, but if there are other low-cost ways we can improve safety, we're going to try that too. And so far, so good, and my hope is the ADA and the L. All right, so the latest. So I don't have an actual date into when the entire system, we can get that for you, but so this year, 14th Street, 6th Ave, and 7th Ave will be completed, as I said, by middle of this year. And then there are 3 other stations that are already accessible. We can come back to you about what the plan would be for the next capital program. But suffice to say, our goal of getting 95% of the system accessible by 2050 is our goal. And, Chair Lieber has challenged us to see if we can do better than that in terms of the date.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the graciousness and the time, and also look into the Essex to Lansing. Okay.
Well, yes.
Missed opportunity here. Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Davey. So few things. One is I'm going to take you up on your offer. I'm Councilmember Schulman. I represent Central Queens, Forest Hills, Kew Gardens, Richmond Hill. I would say it's a transit-rich, somewhat rich area, but we do have issues, especially accessibility, because the chair came out to my district and saw one station is accessible and then the other one isn't, so it's difficult just to get on at the one station and then not be able to get around. What I do want to talk to you about is the express buses.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've noticed, because I take them all the time.
Thank you.
The QM11, I'm going to say that, and the QM18 and QM42. But what I often see is that I'll go for a particular bus to get a bus, and then on the app it says, we don't have the personnel to cover the bus, and we're doing the best we can. So what is being done there to make sure that the buses run on a regular basis?
Yeah, so employee availability has been a huge focus of ours. 20 years ago, in the year 2000, the average transit employee worked 215 days. 2 years ago, it was 188. So over a 20-year period, we've lost almost 20 days. And even if you take out COVID, which obviously was an excruciating time for all of us, just not acceptable. So we've been working with our partners in labor, the ATU and the TWU, to improve that. I think this year we're averaging about 198, 199 across New York City Transit, which I'm happy about, but we still got to improve. And so when you see that, that means that there is absenteeism, folks calling in sick, whatever, the reasons may be. We've made a huge and concerted effort to hire bus operators as well. So it's not just about getting folks to work, but it's also making sure we've got the appropriate number of bus operators. We're pretty much there in terms of the budget, but we do that, which is critical. So, but we just have to do a better job of working with our partners in labor and making sure that those employees, feel safe, are coming to work, and are getting on those buses. I would also say too that I don't know if you use an app but I don't think our bus app is that great. We're actually
It isn't.
No, exactly.
It isn't.
No, it's not. And so
It says the bus is coming until it's not.
well, or if there are detours, for example, which actually happen very frequently in our city.
Yes.
And so you don't know the bus is like 2 blocks away. This will be some news, but we are quietly piloting. Now it's not so quiet because the press gallery is typing. A new app, internal. We haven't launched it yet to see if we can make those improvements. One of the challenges with our buses is that the ping is every 30 seconds, not every 2 or 3 seconds. So you see the bus sort of standing still and it moves 2 blocks. It's part of the challenge. I use buses frequently too, and this has been my feedback. So we're very much focused on that. But so it's employee availability, making sure we're hiring, and then improving the communication we're getting out to our customers. That's our strategy.
Chair, I just had a couple of questions. All right, thank you. The other is that it hasn't happened recently, but used to happen very often, so I use the Omni card. And
Thank you.
when it doesn't work, they just say, just get on the bus, don't worry about it. And that's losing money for you guys, and I want to pay, so I just wanted to ask about that too.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly frustrating. That's self-inflicted wound, right? As we talked about fare evasion before, there are folks who want to pay, and our system is we did a software upgrade in December for those validators, which we know helped, and we're also getting better reporting now. So buses, we're attempting to make sure that buses, before they leave our depots, that those validators are working. And if they're not, then we're getting better reports to ensure that they are. But I couldn't agree with you more. And that's what our bus operators are told to do, not harass a customer, right? Go ahead. But we've been pushing Cubic to give us better reporting as well. So again, I am with you on that, and we're focused on.
And the last thing I want to just put in my 2 cents about expanding the express bus service, especially on the weekends, because that would bring in a whole bunch of people to do shopping and everything else, especially in Queens, to go into Manhattan. So I wanted to put that out there because I think that would be of value.
Yeah, we're looking at that. We're also looking at express buses relative to congestion pricing too. So we know that there are some routes that we do have good ridership, particularly during the weeks and potentially in the weekend with congestion pricing. So I think express buses in particular is a place we're watching closely as ridership grows, and should we be adding more service. But I appreciate that point.
Yeah, and by the way, I do take the surveys, so I just want to mention that.
And just so you know, I know sometimes people feel like they go nowhere. We read them. So this team knows I'm probably obsessed with it in an unhealthy way, but c'est la vie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Welcome.
Thank you. Next we'll hear from Councilmember Ressler.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's good to see you. I will say that I miss Will Shorts.
We all do. Notice I had to bring 20 people with me.
We all
because
miss
Will is no longer.
Will's a good egg. Will Schwartz is a good egg. So I just wanted that on the record. But on to the issues of the day. Just firstly, Speaker made a great announcement. I mean, Speaker made many great announcements in her State of the City address yesterday, one of which was to bring some real accountability to the streets plan. I just wanted to see, do you support her legislation to ensure that we actually get the bus lanes built that we've been promised?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, I haven't looked at her legislation, but do I support bus lanes? Yes. I mean, you know.
And more accountability to get the bus lanes built that we all have been promised would be terrific, right?
Yes, I mean, certainly
I'd love to just quote
Sure.
Jano, if you don't mind. I think he
I
said,
do mind. No, I'm kidding.
if I can find it, he said, you know, essentially, I love the Eric Adams of 2022 when he was committed to building more bus lanes. He campaigned on it. We've seen just an extraordinary bait and switch from this administration. But as we know, bus lanes require partnership between the DOT and the MTA. And so I'd just like to get some more information from New York City Transit on what's actually in the pipeline. Is anything happening? Are there any new bus lanes that are actually getting built in the city of New York? We all have the data in the PMMR. We see that bus lanes are going as slow as ever. We see that we are dramatically behind our goals of the 150 miles of new bus lanes that have to be built in New York City over the next couple of years. And it doesn't appear that the administration is making any new announcements about bus lanes around the city. But you have more insight than perhaps what we have. So could you advise us, how many current new bus lane projects are underway and are planned for implementation either this fiscal year over the next 3 months or for the calendar year in 2024?
So I could neither speak for the DOT or make commitments on their behalf.
No, but they consult with you about the things that are in the works, and I'm just trying to understand, is there anything behind the curtain?
No, and no, there's nothing behind the curtain. I will defer to them to answer, but I will say this, which is, you know, from my perspective, I think New York City Transit's perspective, MTA, the more bus lanes, the better, right? And so,
but they have to talk to you about the projects that are planned because
Sure.
they need you to implement them. They
Sure.
need the drivers. They need all of it. So what are they talking to you about?
And those conversations are generally staff to staff. So am I fully up to date on what's been happening over the last couple of weeks? I'm not. But I just wanted to give you...
Can you speak broadly to the number of new bus lane projects that are in the works that you're anticipating for implementation? Because I just keep hearing from MTA leadership how incredibly frustrated you all are that the DOT and this mayor, let's be real, it's the mayor, because DOT would love to build these bus lanes, the mayor has just decided he doesn't care about bus lanes anymore. Can you give us any insight to new projects that are being planned or any progress that we can look forward to?
I mean, respectfully, Councilmember, a lot to unpack there. Let me just say this, you know, the administration broadly for transit has been very good. Safety has been the dominant topic, and the mayor and his team have been terrific in giving us the resources we need to combat that. I'm on the record as saying, for example, Fordham Road was a disappointment. I think I wrote a letter.
Recall.
And, you know, we're going to watch that closely. Probably 150 bus lanes wouldn't even be enough in my view, but there are other constituencies that the administration has to work with. I get that. But that said,
I'm not asking you to indict the mayor. I just am asking for this, for information on the projects that are coming. It doesn't sound like we're going to hear any of that today. Madam Chair, if I could ask one more question, if that'd be okay.
Last question.
Last question. Despite my deep frustration that the bus mayor has disappeared and gone home, and that we have no bus projects to be shared today from the MTA, just want to ask you, we've got a 6-week G-train shutdown that's coming this summer that I'm deeply concerned about. We know you have plans for shuttle buses, but shuttle buses aren't going to move through the traffic in our neighborhoods and provide any real help to folks. So is there a plan for an actual busway and for rapid bus transit to get people in and out of our community with a 6-week G-train shutdown? Because as you know, Greenpoint has no other transit. We live and die on the G-train.
So a couple of things, Councilmember. So number one is, obviously shutting down service for that period of time is going to be inconvenient for our customers, if not worse. The alternative was, I think, 80 weekends of a shutdown. My perspective is you rip the Band-Aid off of these projects, get them done, and get out. As to your question on a plan, one thing that we're committed to, and it's been successful with our weekends, is we committed and appointed a weekend service czar that's very much focused on that. We're going to appoint a G-Train czar to be focused on the buses, to be working with the DOT, NYPD if we need to, our customer service staff. And I think what I have found often is in some of these projects, it's not coordinated, right? And it really requires an individual to, sleep, eat, and breathe that particular project. So you have my commitment there. We're still working with the city in terms of how that actual shuttle bus will work, but I can assure you this is, we've heard you and some of your other colleagues about your concerns. I'm concerned as well. I want to make sure that our customers are getting the best possible service that we can provide.
I appreciate it. We'd love to discuss further, because shuttle buses in highly congested areas aren't going to be all that helpful. I just, I
happy
have
to
to.
have that conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. We're going
Thank
to
you.
now move on to Councilmember Ariola, followed by Narcisse.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify that there are areas that are transit deserts, and they do exist. And if you spoke with our chair and Majority Whip, Sylvina Brooks Powers, and my constituents, they could show you exactly where it is. So that being said, thank you for the ADA upgrade on the J line on Jamaica Avenue and the A line on Rockaway Boulevard for the elevators that are put in. I also want to say that Danny Randell and Luke DePalma are amazing partners in keeping us abreast of what's happening.
Will Schwartz, who? Is that at the...
Keeping us abreast of what's happening, the changes, and if there are any issues, they are addressed immediately. Thank you both very much for being as available as you are. I'm happy to hear that you're running on a balanced operating budget, but in your entire budget and in your entire speech and your entire commitment to have trains and buses be accessible, I didn't hear you say anything about the Queens Link. And that, again, is very important to the people of the Rockaway Peninsula, and which the chair and I both represent. Why is it with surplus and balanced budgets, we don't hear anything about an EIS study for the Queens Link or any consideration of it?
Councilmember, I'll jump in for that. So the project you're discussing, it was studied in the 20-year needs. And this is very different from what we did before, which is there will be a host of different projects that are looked at by different teams. We went to one place and put them together so that and called it a comparative evaluation, so that we're looking at it holistically, all the projects that are expansion projects together, and scoring them and understanding what they bring as far as ridership, potential growth, and what existing capacity is already there. So I will make sure that you get a copy of the comparative evaluation and the discussion of that project and its status. And then from here, this is where the decision makers and our funding partners will make that decision. So to be clear, this is something we did look at, and there'll be further discussion, but let's,
Do you have a timeline for when decisions will be made?
So the next step is, as you build out the capital program, there's statutory language, state law. What we do is we'll put together a capital program probably over this summer, because by next fall, we will have to go to Albany with a capital program, which includes all our transit projects, Long Island Railroad, Metro North, bridge and tunnels, et cetera, laid out. And then what is the envelope that we're talking about as far as funding? And so that conversation will take place over the summer. What we're doing first is getting out there what our needs are, so people understand exactly what we're talking about and how thorough we were. That was the mandate. It's like, do the work, do the research, find out what's needed, and then come back to us and let's figure out the funding for it. And that includes expansion projects.
Okay, and just, if I can, because that was a pretty lengthy answer.
Sorry.
So on the congestion pricing, of course, I've been staunchly opposed to congestion pricing. So I want to also clarify that the lawsuits that you refer to with litigants in New Jersey and other litigants, one of which I am, they're not pro-traffic lawsuits, they're pro-people lawsuits. And the last is we have buses that come into the Rockaway Peninsula. The 35 is on the Rockaway Peninsula. With the uptick in ridership on that particular bus, because of the migrant bus base camp over in Floyd Bennett Field, it really has been very difficult for the riders to get a bus that's empty, and for our school children that go to school in Brooklyn to get a seat. So we're asking for additional buses on that bus line. And also, we need to address that people are not paying to get on the buses. They're not paying to ride, they're not getting a ticket. They're getting on in the back, and there is no enforcement. So I'd like to just know what you're doing about that. Thank you.
Sure. So on enforcement, like I couldn't agree more. What we've done recently is hire more Eagle Team members and started to deploy them on buses. So we'll take a look at those routes that in particular you're looking at, but that is a major concern. And frankly, I teased it a little bit or mentioned it a little bit in my remarks, which is, if there's a potential setback for our healthy fiscal outlook over the next 5 years is not addressing toll and fare evasion across MTA. So it's something we're very, very focused on. And yeah, bus customers have to pay their fare. We do have enforcement out. Equity is also part of that too. I mentioned at the beginning that really partnering with this body and the mayor and his team around fair fares is really important, because there are New Yorkers who are struggling as well. Who aren't, who probably don't wish, who don't wish themselves to beat the fare, but they're struggling to pay the $2.90. But if we can offer them $1.45, it certainly helps. So there's a lot there. I mean, relative to bus routes, I would just say this. I mean, we keep a very close eye on ridership, and so happy to have a conversation about particular routes. But we do keep a very close eye on average ridership patterns to see. Most of our buses now, about 70%, have automated passenger counters now, so we know how many people are getting on and off a bus. So, are there instances where there might be a crowded bus? Of course. But overall, throughout the system, we keep a close eye on it. But happy to have a conversation about particular routes.
Yeah, especially on the 35, and I think that's good that you're keeping account, because I don't want to lose buses because
Right.
you think there's a lessened ridership, and that's because people are not paying for the toll. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Rich, for coming to our 46th district. Before I start the question, I want to say every day is a special day for the transit workers, because I know it's been tough, especially during COVID. They step up for us in New York City. Thank you for that, and looking forward for a zero emission by 2040, because we need to do that. Thank you. And my question is, when it comes to the redesigning, how is the progress for Brooklyn bus redesigning is going, and is it on target?
So how's it going? I would say it's deliberate, and it is on target into 2025. And I say deliberate because, again, I've learned in this business a long time, and certainly here in New York, is public feedback and public process is so important. I think, MTA learned a lesson before COVID with some redesigns where I think there was an attempt to move things along quickly, and that caught a lot of customers by surprise, constituents, elected officials. And so, Brooklyn is a very deliberate process. I think we've got more iterations to go. And as I mentioned earlier, our customers, our bus operators for that matter, know these routes, know the traffic patterns, know the bus stops better than we do. In the Bronx, for example, even after we went through a full public process and rolled out the bus redesign, we still made a few more changes. I think we brought back in the Bronx like 10 or 12 bus stops, because we saw that, where they were located. I think one was at a senior center, one was at a major house of worship. It just didn't make sense. So, you've got my commitment. We're going to continue to listen. And even after we implement the changes, which will be likely in 2025, we're probably going to make more changes as well.
Thank you for that. Since my chair is looking at me for the timing, let's go on that. I'm looking forward for B76 on Avenue L, and we're excited for that, but I have complained for Marine Park for B2, so I hope you're still looking into that. And we are in transportation desert, and L is still a problem, the train, when it comes to weekends especially. I still have a lot of complaint for that. And thank you for making them more accessible, the station. So we appreciate that. And I have complained on delay on B47. A lot of seniors complaining when they have to get access to get to their office. You know, L is our lifeline to get out of, because we live in transportation desert. So please work on that. What else you have to answer me? I think, B35, I was gonna ask, I thank you, Councilwoman Yola that already addressed that. So I'm looking forward and I'm excited for the progress and for a better way. And then you've been going my way, coming to in front of our office for our seniors for the half fair. I appreciate that. So looking forward for a better transit.
3
so
minutes was fleeting. You know where to find me. So if we can do anything, please.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Shekhar Krishna.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Chair, for a great hearing today. Thank you so much to all of you at MTA, to President Davey for testifying. I just had 2 questions, following up on, and I appreciate the MTA's work, in particular around express bus lanes, making sure to find ways to get people using our buses and making our traffic more efficient and increasing our ridership. In that regard, an important piece of this too is, of course, enforcement, to make sure that when we create express bus lanes or other bus lanes, that buses are able to use them and not cars blocking them. The reason why I bring that up is I think you guys have done great work in my district in Jackson Heights with the Northern Boulevard bus lane. But there are 2 issues in particular I wanted to just mention to you all. One is I'm, of course, very supportive of the bus lanes and always have been and appreciate your work. What we're noticing now is that there are a number of cars that are using the bus lane to get around traffic, are parking in the bus lane or double parking in the bus lane. I think what could really help is camera enforcement for bus lanes and making sure they're dedicated only for bus lanes. Would you all be open to looking into that and seeing what would be possible to, because without the enforcement, it just doesn't work.
You had me at hello. I mean, the answer is yes. So, so 2 things there. One is we are expanding our camera enforcement this May, actually, and it's not only for bus lanes, but it's actually for buses that aren't in bus lanes where cars are double parked, or cars are actually parked in our bus stops, which, by the way, is a pet peeve of mine, because that, for our customers who are disabled, by the way, getting off a bus in the middle of traffic, I mean, is totally unsafe. So that's one. 2 is, and NYPD has been incredibly helpful. We formed a traffic enforcement group with them back in December, and they put resources behind. We've been very focused on Queens and Brooklyn in particular, a bit in the Bronx as well for bus enforcement, where we have less cameras. But the bottom line is, yes, if you are not a bus, get out of my bus lane. I say that all the time, and happy to support your concerns on Northern Boulevard.
Sure, and as you're rolling it out in May, if you can look at prioritizing Northern Boulevard, because it connects so many communities. The bus lane has been transformative for bus service in this part of Queens. After a lot of discussion about the bus routes, it's been really transformative, but it's going to require that enforcement as soon as possible to ensure that that progress continues.
Right.
My other question on the same note too was, can you also take a look at express bus service? Now that we have that bus lane there on Northern Boulevard, having express buses too, I think would help commuters and would be just a significant way to make sure that we continue to use our bus service and bus lane there. That again is great, but with enforcement and with express bus service, I think could be very helpful.
We certainly will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Chair.
Councilmember. So just have a couple more questions before we close this portion of today's prelim with the MTA. I do want to ask a couple of questions pertaining to Accessoride. Last year, the state enacted budget increased the city's share of the Accessoride program from 50% to 70%. The Accessoride program has a history of poor service, though, as you've noted, on-time performance has improved in recent years. How is MTA ensuring further improvements to the Accessoride service in this budget?
Sure. So, and maybe we'll make some news here. Yesterday, we had 37,000 paratransit customers, the highest ridership day in New York City Transit history, not pre-COVID, post-COVID. This is the number of riders. So we know how important it is to deliver good service for our paratransit customers. And we are working hard, Chair. You're right. We are rewriting that history. 3-4 years ago, customer service, customer satisfaction was in the 40 percentile. We were running poor service, not great service. Today, I'm proud to say, and I know I always say this, and I know some of our most fervent advocates are behind me. I want to acknowledge them because they hold us accountable as well. This is not always the lived experience for every single one of our customers, but 79% on customer satisfaction in January, and some of the best on-time performance we've seen. How are we improving? So we're focusing in on that. We're pushing our vendors who are providing the service. That's one. Now you can book with an app. So rather than calling that phone number, you can actually use an mobile app to book your ride. We're experimenting right now with eHail Phase 2. eHail Phase 1, the pilot went on for like 6 years. I don't know how many pilots go on for 6 years. That one did. We're in the midst of a 6-month pilot, which will be winding down soon, to see how else we can improve eHail, which is on-demand service, not required by the federal government, better service for our customers, and we've gotten some good feedback as well. So we're looking at new technologies. So we have an antiquated routing system that routes our service around. We have RFPs out. I think actually the RFP I think went out this past week. And then lastly, as I mentioned in my testimony, we actually shrank the on-time performance window. I think 30 minutes to be, within 30 minutes, not a great on-time requirement, even though that is the federal standard. We shrunk that down to 20 to challenge ourselves to do better. So again, we have work to do, but it is very much a focal point of ours. We had 4 million subway customers, I think yesterday, the first time we eclipsed 4 million this year. But our 37,000 paratransit customers are just as important and are just as a big part of how I think about, dedicating time and resources to improve our service.
And the MTA recently offered more customers access to Access-to-Ride eHail service pilot, though this also placed additional restrictions on the use of this service. Can you provide a status update on Phase 2 of the eHail pilot?
Yeah, so not yet. We said we would do a 6-month review, which, as I said, we're sort of closing in on a couple things. Number one, we know customers are incredibly satisfied with the service, eHail, as a general matter. But you're right. What we did was put into place to expand the number. We went from 1,200 to up to 3,600 folks who would be eligible to take the service, and it was a 25-40. You could take 40 trips at a cost of $25 we would cover, or 25 trips and we would cover up to $40. I think one concern we've heard from our customers, which is we're looking at, is how far that gets you within a multi-borough trip, for example. So that's something we're looking at. But as you mentioned at the outset, we're also cognizant that 70% of the dollars we're spending are the cities. And so we're trying to ensure that we're also good stewards of the dollars that you all provide, but at the same time provide good service. So I don't think we've hit the sweet spot yet. And so, my expectation is later, this spring, if not summer, we would be talking publicly about what a Phase 3 would look like.
I know you've been asked a couple of questions already about congestion price, and I just had 2 really quick follow-up questions. A significant amount of the 2020 to 2024 capital plan is funded with resources collected from congestion pricing, but in all likelihood, congestion pricing will not be initiated until the very end of the plan period or outside of the plan period. Does the MTA have sufficient funding available without resources of congestion pricing to fully finance the entirety of the current capital plan?
Sadly, no. And we've been pretty clear about that if congestion pricing fails for whatever reason or reasons, litigants or otherwise, there are a whole host of things we won't be doing. As I mentioned, signal systems, other upgrades, ADA stations will be delayed, maybe into the next capital plan. There are going to be a lot of things that are going to hit the cutting floor for sure. But no, there is no plan B. There is no plan B. The plan B is to not do things, fundamentally.
And will the MTA continue to fund and complete projects in the current plan after the completion of the plan?
I mean, we always do, right? I think it's a commitment question. And then, for example, rolling stock takes usually, years to come, to fruition. But the answer is yes, we can commit the dollars, but then the actual construction and ribbon cutting, if you will, can happen beyond the current capital plan.
I think if I can add to that,
sure.
right? The conversation, the envelope was $55 billion for the 2024 capital plan, and the MTA always had said that they would commit the $15 billion for congestion pricing prior to committing the last $8 to $10 billion that the MTA would do. At this point, we've actually started committing our own dollars to move projects along, and we're at the point where the last $15 billion is necessary for us to continue the projects. And as you heard President Davey say earlier, this is why we've put on hold certain projects, right? The CBTC, Second Avenue Subway could be in jeopardy because we're up to the limit of where we need dollars to start committing if we don't have the revenue sources.
And to that point, I just want clarity on that. So are you saying that MTA has already put up as much as it would like to put up, and it would like to have the additional $15 billion through congestion pricing, or is MTA absolutely unable to put in that $15 billion if it had to?
So we're absolutely unable to put $15 billion if we don't have congestion pricing.
How much of the $15 billion is MTA able to put up?
Excuse me?
How much of the $15 billion, if it came down to it, would the MTA be able to put up?
So the MTA, as part of the capital funding envelope, already has $8 billion committed of our own money, and we've started to advance that piece of the dollars of the envelope to the capital program.
That's in addition to the 15?
The 15 is in addition, yes, in addition, because it's a $55 billion. There's federal,
Right.
there's state, there's city committed.
So I'm trying to understand that 15, that final 15, just based on how you responded. So with that 15, because the impression I got from your response was that is the capital improvements that are needed up to that remaining 15 billion is accounted for, but with that 15 billion, it seems almost like there is something the MTA could do to contribute towards that 15 billion, or is it absolute?
It's an absolute necessary.
That's what I wanted clarity
to get to continue the program.
Of the 55 billion, we're at the last 15 billion. That's congestion pricing. Everything else was filled up, as Jay said, by federal government, by our own dollars, by the state, by the city for that matter. The last 15 billion is all about congestion pricing. If congestion pricing doesn't happen, those projects do not happen in this capital plan. It may never happen.
So also wanting to add on to Councilmember Ariola's question in terms of Queens Link. Offline, I've had a number of conversations with different representatives of the MTA, and just wanting to get on record that the MTA, that the Queens Way, which is the park aspect of the conversation with Queens Link, building that park will not prevent further scoping of the viability for Queens Link.
I would have to get back to you. I don't know the extent of the work that the city has planned specifically there, but our review.
I mean, I've been
that we
told by the MTA and the administration that the Queens Way, the development of the Queens Way, would not get in the way of the right-of-way for the Queens Link.
Yeah,
I just want confirmation on record.
That is the case. It's not precluding something being done in the future, but we, as I said previously, in our 20-year needs, we've started to look at this, and I think we've been meeting with you and your team and having discussions along with all these other projects that we have to look at. So we'll continue to do that as we put together a capital program.
What are the metrics the MTA is looking at with respect to Queens Link and projects like Queens Link when assessing viability for NEIS? I've also requested in the past to be able to contribute to an EIS, but was told not to. And so I'd like to understand on the record what those metrics are as it pertains to assessing the viability of an EIS.
And sure, and we'll walk you through it, but it's a pretty complex review looking at a whole host of measures from, the obvious, which is cost effectiveness and ridership, but we also took a deep dive into equity. We want to make sure that we're growing in a fair way. We want to be concerned about geographic distribution so that we're not just growing or supporting expansion in one area and not others. And then sustainability is
How are you
high.
growing and expanding in Rockaway or Southeast Queens?
So, for example, in Southeast Queens, by having by modernizing the signals on the QBL, it's going to allow us to run more service, and by more service, that's growth. That's like the new way.
You're talking about the Q and
the QBL, which is the Queens Boulevard line. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So, but that's going out to Jamaica. That's the feeder service where so many of our buses link into. So. The point is, you don't want to just grow in one specific area of the city. That's part of this study. Resiliency is, how is this making our system more resilient so that we can continue to run and run more? And then capacity, where are we with capacity? When you look at something like Queens Link, you're going to want to see, has there been growth since the Long Island Railroad shut that line down in the early 60s because there wasn't enough ridership? What is the changes? What's the potential?
There's growth in Rockaway.
Yeah, exactly. What is the
You should come
potential
visit.
growth? So those are that's the host of areas that we looked at, and it's we're happy to go over it with you and your team.
And I'm glad you mentioned in terms of equity and how growth looks. I was talking to my staff just this week and looking at a map of the subway lines. And when you look on that map across the boroughs, when you look in Canarsie, Brooklyn, for example, in Councilmember Narcise's district, there's absolutely no subways. When you look in Southeast Queens, at the end of the E and J line and the F line, and you go southeast, there is absolutely no subway line. When you look at the buses that we have, while we have a few express buses that come into Manhattan, they all go into Midtown, where a lot of our workforce comes downtown. So when we talk about equity, and as we are now approaching congestion pricing and the implementation of the state-approved congestion pricing plan, we run the risk of deepening inequity and access in this city. And I have not seen from the MTA or anyone, quite honestly, on how we address that. The systems are what they are. The infrastructure in terms of our transit network are very deep, and we have to challenge one another to think innovatively on how we create greater access. Because to implement a toll congestion pricing at the same time that we're not expanding services or even exploring how we create greater access is very dangerous. And so when we look at the population shift, when we look at 200,000 Black New Yorkers leaving New York City and unable to afford to stay here, people rely on our amazing transportation system because it's the best in the country, right? I will say that any day of the week. But we have to make sure that it's meeting New Yorkers where they are and where they need to go.
Yep, and I just, want to echo and support what you said. Mass transit is the engine of equity, and that is something that we talk about day in and day out. And when you think about equity, it's around looking at the cost of the fare, and not only the traditional buses and subways, looking at making sure that our folks have access to the railroads that, have plowed through our communities, and just getting the word out, too, of our different fare products. And as you said, where the subway systems are already built, and we're looking at, expanding those stations, whether it's through the 4 new Metro North station and the, IBX. But looking at buses too, with the approach of the bus redesign, making sure that our buses are meeting our customers' needs. So happy to have a conversation with you and everyone else around, how we can continue to make sure and ensure that the mass transit remain equitable. I'm happy to have that because that is, front and top of mind for me every day.
And to that point, going back into equity and access, with congestion pricing, what about affordability? Do you have long-term plans to allow, for example, free transfers through city ticket between commuter rail and other modes of transportation?
So, and you were a supporter of this, and certainly the governor pushed this through, and the mayor, on the city ticket changes. And that's sort of
Just to be clear, I was not in support of getting rid of Atlantic tickets. So I just want to be clear on the difference of that.
But the good news is the city ticket has added ridership opportunities, and we're seeing it with the numbers. So I think there's more to be done in that area, where we know that there's legislation at the state level on this right now that we're taking, we're just getting this week, we're taking a look at that. But we're all about opportunities to get more people to use transit. Like Rich said, we had the busiest day of the year on the subways yesterday. That's very exciting. We're going to, think about 4 years ago, we were going the other way, shutting it down 4 years ago to the day. So that we're always open to those ideas. How can we get more people to use our network and different parts of our network, meaning more buses that go to the railroad stations, both in Metro North Territory and Long Island Railroad. Think about Southeast Queens. There's so many stations that were underutilized. But today, like St. Albans has more trains than they ever had stopping there. That's good news. Fordham in the Bronx, we've doubled the number of trains that stop there. It used to be that trains going to Connecticut just didn't stop. Not anymore. And they're available at a lower price. So more opportunities like that, we're going to explore.
And then when we think about fair fares, just wanted to talk about that program. It's important. This is such an important program for so many New Yorkers in need. And yesterday, in the Speaker's State of the City remarks, she once again called for the eligibility threshold to increase to 200% of the federal poverty level. At the HRA preliminary budget hearing, HRA talked about their partnership with the MTA for fair fares programming. And can you talk to us about how you work with HRA to promote the program? And can you walk us through the MTA's efforts to increase fair fares uptake among eligible New Yorkers? And is outreach funded in the MTA budget?
So we are in constant communication with the mayor's office as well as the DSS around fair fares. There is no shortage of conversation, as well as the opportunity to promote the program. As President Davies said in his opening remarks, we are currently using 2 of our customer service centers, which we have about 16 across the city. We have converted, in addition to information around Omni and other service information, we are doing enrollment days at those 2 centers a couple times a month. And the goal is, at the end of the year, to grow the number of customer service centers, and partnering with the city agency to do more fair fare enrollment days. President Davey, twice a month, it seems like every other week actually, does transit talks day, going into the system with execs and other members of the transit team and engaging customers around concerns and feedback. And we have fair fare enrollment team there. I mean, it goes beyond giving out brochures and information and awareness about the program, but we have them with their iPads. We publicize and advertise well ahead of the event and encourage people to come with their information, and we do on-site enrollment. We are using our digital screens to bring awareness of the program, and just, again, encouraging people to use our centers as well as, the city agencies' points to enroll into the program. So we will continue to do our part to, again, bring awareness and grow enrollment. And we welcome the City Council's commitment, and their investment in the Fair Fares program, as well as raising the eligibility, because as we, whether it's congestion pricing or fare hearings that we have, there are those that, whether they're students or those who are sort of, low income but are working class that, are close to that eligibility, can stand to benefit from that. So we welcome that partnership again.
Thank you. I'm going to now turn over questions to Councilmember Rivera, followed by Lewis, followed by Krishnan.
Thank you so much. We've talked about the bus quite a bit, which I appreciate. I take both the bus and the train every day. In the state enacted budget, funding was included for a pilot program which offers one free bus route in every borough. Can you update the committee on the pilot program? How did you choose which bus routes to make free to passengers? What have you learned that could inform future decisions? And how did you measure success?
Sure. So we're still in the midst of that pilot right now for the 5 across the 5 boroughs. How do we choose them? So we looked at a few things. We looked at the statute. Certainly outlined a few. We looked at a few others, but certainly it was demographic, it was income level, it was ensuring that, one thing we looked at was to ensure the bus line or the bus route didn't follow a subway line, because we didn't want to sort of cannibalize the subway to bus. We really wanted to see, are new people taking more trips, or are they taking, or there's the same folks, for example, or are folks just getting off a subway and taking bus, we not moving the dial. So that's how we thought. About the service, and then not redundant bus service. As you know, some bus service we have is redundant. We have several routes running along the same line. Again, we didn't want, sort of everyone to leave a couple of routes and all plow onto the free route. So that's how we selected it. I think we're relatively close, and we'll be able to provide information to the committee probably in the next month or so about how the pilot worked. I mean, in measures of success, I think it'll be customer satisfaction. That's my North Star. We always go back to that, our customer satisfied. Not surprising, people like free things, so I expect we'll see customer satisfaction will be high. I have no doubt we're going to see that ridership was higher, for sure. But I think understanding, again, are there folks using the system more? Were we able to attract new folks to the system? Or, were we able to attract people out of their cars, for example, or were they previously walking? Like, understanding how behavior changed is going to be, I think, an important part of informing, MTA and other stakeholders in the future about, other pilots like this.
And you'll be able to see what impact the free bus routes had on the subway stations, I imagine, that
Correct.
they connect to?
Yep, that's correct.
Have you seen an increase in subway ridership at stations along the route?
Have we seen an increase in subway ridership? That I do not know off the top of my head. We've been watching more ridership on the buses, and I know that we saw an increase in bus ridership. I haven't seen the latest data on that, but I know early on we saw increases. But all of that, to your point, Councilmember, will be thought through. Did we see an increase in subway ridership as well? We certainly see this across the system. We've seen an increase in subway ridership year over year. But whether that's related to the free buses, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I thank you. Yesterday, you said you had a big day at the subway, right?
4.01 million.
All right.
Paid.
I was on the 6 at least twice, so glad to contribute.
Thank
And
you.
If I could just...
Maybe it was 4.00002.
I have the
and you are
receipts.
the so thank you.
I've got them all here, my Omni collection, but
Thank you.
when you look at the metrics by the survey, does the survey, and forgive me for not knowing this,
Sure.
say explicitly by riders that they feel safer with more cops in the subway?
So the answer is yes. I mean, we asked them, sort of a couple different questions. Do you feel safer this month versus last month? I mean, that's a question. We've seen that last couple months actually decline. It'll be interesting to see in February and March if that changes. We also asked the question, do you think, it's the Goldilocks sort of question, are there too many cops, too few cops, or is it just right? And the answer is, what we've seen over the last few months is folks are saying, we want to see more cops in the system. So that's consistent. It's a consistent question we've asked the last 2 years, and we sort of track it, on a month-to-month basis. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the additional round.
Thank you, Chair. As we get to the end of this, right? We didn't get to talk about bus speed, so I wanted to know if you could share with us the current average bus speed of MTA buses, and if you could provide information and breakdown on both the average for local and select buses and by borough.
Sure. So I don't think I have that data in front of me, but the answer is we absolutely track it by borough, by select bus versus not. We also track customer satisfaction. I can tell you, just at a high level, it's intolerably slow. So, I think Manhattan might be slightly better than some of the other boroughs, but the bottom line is it's like, the best of the worst. It is intolerably slow, which is why we have been, and Shanifa mentioned this, buses in particular, the engine of equity, and I think in the past, perhaps, it hasn't been as much of a focus maybe for other administrations. It is a huge focus for us, not only in the bus redesigns, but also as, your colleague, Councilmember Krishna asked earlier about thinking about the enforcement question. And, what we know about enforcement is it changes behavior, right? When a New Yorker gets a ticket from a bus, 80% of the time, they never get a second ticket.
Right.
And 90% of the time, they never get a third ticket because behavior changes, which is great news. But we also know traffic has increased. It's back in many respects to pre-COVID.
Right.
And we also know, too, you all see it, ambulances, fire trucks. I would not want to be a New Yorker in distress. Ambulances seem to get stuck in traffic all the time.
Right.
That's intolerable as well. So working on this sort of holistic approach will speed up buses, no doubt, but also improve, those emergency vehicles getting around the city.
So we know the MTA loves surveys, right?
I'm sorry, we love
surveys because
Yes.
that's the North Star, right? That's
Yes,
what we're
I am
doing today?
obsessed with that. I'm
So
sorry.
I wanted to ask, how are you utilizing the surveys to enhance performance time?
Sure.
And both just making sure that the feedback is implemented to improve?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. So, in a few ways. So, and I could talk about this. I don't know how much time I have, Chair, but so a couple things. Number one is I have my station management team in once a month, the entire 25 folks, to talk about the customer surveys. This station is not clean. There's concerns about fare evasion here. There's concerns about homelessness there. What are we doing about it? Who are we talking to? The NYPD COs, homeless outreach, et cetera. So we're putting into action very specifically what our customers are asking for within the station environment, which was also the impetus behind our renovation and our LED program, et cetera. Line managers. So we also have our line managers in who manage our subway lines now. We're starting that next week to talk about, okay, what are we seeing? Is there crowding on platforms? What's our terminal performance in terms of departures? How can we improve, getting trains out? We very much use that data as well. And then lastly, on the bus side, what we did last year was we took the 29 underperforming routes. We have about 200 plus bus routes in the city. We focused on just the 29 worst. Customers were saying it was bad, bus speeds were super slow, et cetera. And we focused very much on those 29 routes. Everything from potholes need to be fixed to NYPD needs to be out doing traffic enforcement to maybe some of our bus operators need to be motivated to get out on time, et cetera. I'm thankful that 10 of those have graduated because we've made so much improvement and we've rotated them in. We look at what our customers are telling us all the time because, look, that's the business we're ultimately in. Traditionally in this business, it's like mean distance between failure and all these metrics that ultimately don't say, are your customers satisfied? And that's what we're obsessed with.
Thank you. It'd be good to get an update on the 29 and the output.
Sure, absolutely.
Yes.
And I just want to add that all our bus speed data are on our open data portal, so we'll make sure you get that link, and there's so much more information we're throwing up there as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks. Just a few more questions from my end, too. And you may have actually touched on these before, but just wanted to make sure we had it clear for the record, too, on this information. Sure. So one is, what is the timeline on signaling upgrades?
So it's multi-year, right? And so, as mentioned earlier, for the AC, the BDF&M, that's delayed as a result of congestion pricing. But it's a multi-year process, right? Because we're literally, building the bike as we're riding it, i.e. we're installing the signal systems while we're still running service. So that'll take time. The good news is we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of years to get that done. But we can get you an exact date, but it's definitely a multi-year process for sure. Got it. And that's the reason, because we're not, we're not shutting down lines for months at a time.
Mm-hmm. And what's the cost, the projected cost of upgrading the entire system?
It's in the billions. I'll get you the exact number, sure. But it's an expensive proposition, but one that needs to happen. I mean, we have signal system down here at City Hall, and installed literally, 1952. I mean, it's a mini miracle. It's still running 70 years later, but that's what we're up against.
And what improvements in performance have you seen in the lines where CBTC has been implemented?
Huge. So the number 7 line in particular, which I take every day from Hell's Kitchen, has the highest customer satisfaction and the highest on-time performance because the CBT system, the communication-based train control is what CBTC stands for, is our most state-of-the-art signal system, and we're able to run service during rush hour every 2 to 3 minutes. The signal system allows you to run trains safely and more closely together. But customers are happier, the service is better. Mets fans are happier when this, I still call it Shea, pours out, after a game. So, that's what we want to replicate across the transit system.
All right, so I'm going to deviate from this for a second because I'm glad you mentioned the 7 train. I can't believe sure. I forgot this sure. before. As a daily 7 train rider.
Thank you.
I think that, yes, and I think overall, service has been much better with CBTC and things like that. But right now, the work on the 7 train in Queens has dragged on for a while. And I'm seeing it, and all my constituents are seeing it. It's skipping stops as you do each side, and then the delays sometimes. I'm late even here getting for hearings or votes because I'll get on, plan the trip, and it'll take even longer. I know other colleagues that use the 7 train too face the same dilemma. So I understand the work, and I know we've followed up with the agency as well. There is work that needs to be done. But now it's dragging on and it's causing major delays on the train. So what is the timeline to have the work done, and how can we expedite sure. it? Because it is becoming a big issue.
So a lot of that, of course, is ADA work, right? And it is on time and on schedule as far as I know. I'll be corrected if not by someone behind me.
He knows.
So exactly. So it's a 7-station project. We're doing some more work right now, 82nd and 111th, as you know. Yep. I mean, I look at the on-time performance twice a day. I get a report twice a day. So certainly there have been from time to time issues in the 7, but overall it's performing at 90% or above in terms of on-time performance. But unfortunately, that is the trade-off when we're making these major capital improvements.
When's the work going to be done, you think?
I'll find out for you.
Okay,
I don't know. And this sticky didn't know either. So
sure. There's one other thing on that point, too, which I think is, and I'm glad you mentioned accessibility. Yeah. So I think absolutely right. Those repairs need to be done. It's crucial. The subway system needs to be far more accessible than it is. 82nd Street in Jackson Heights, I know you're doing work there. But as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's no elevator there, and my understanding, and other electeds' understanding too, was the work that was being done would put in an elevator at 82nd Street. Right now, number of individuals with disabilities, parents with strollers, who I've helped down. I was one of them myself just a couple of years ago too. It's a real big issue, and it's a very trafficked station. So we're doing all this work, but at the end of it, we're not going to have an accessible subway station there. And so would love to hear more about what can be done.
Sure. So, it sounds like it fell out of this capital plan for funding reasons. The work that's being done there now is a state of good repair work around the station. What I'm told is, if we have identified funding in the future, next capital plan or beyond, the work that's being done should make it easier to put an elevator there. Certainly, we have a lot of work to do to make our system accessible. That's what happens when you run a system that opened in 1904. But we have, You know, and this will, I guess, go back to the congestion pricing question, which I think I think you said you're supportive of, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yes, I am.
This is the reason why we need congestion pricing, is to invest in these kinds of, major upgrades. So, but, obviously we're in the midst of, as John said, our 20-year needs plan is out. We'll be putting together, I think, our draft capital plan in the fall for public comment, et cetera, and the board. So, welcome for any projects, this body's view about what we should be funding for the next 5 years.
And if you can prioritize the elevator, because, we're doing the work on accessibility, but the main accessible component is missing from the construction work. So I think for the next round, it's something I think that really needs, it's not great at all. And so it really needs to be prioritized, especially for shutting down the line.
It is always the balance, right? I mean, obviously you had concerns about some of the other construction happening on 7. We heard it earlier from Councilman Resser on the G. There's always this trade-off between trying to get work done that's critically important, and then the impacts it has to customers. But I definitely hear you. John?
And I would just add that, we're in a race to get as much ADA done as possible. We've done more in the last 4 years than I think we did in the prior 2 capital programs.
Yeah.
And part of that is like picking and, coming up with a criteria that's fair, and sometimes doesn't feel fair because you're doing work at a station. So in the case of 82nd Street, you're right next to 74th Street where it's ADA, and so that works its way into that equation. Like, we don't want people to be more than 2 stations away. But noted, because I understand the point, you're doing work there anyway. But just so you see where our when we're coming up with these plans, what we're dealing with.
Got it. And my final 2 questions are, one more on the 7 is, has there been any look at the line itself is so loud as it goes across? Any look at sound enforcement or finding ways to reduce it? You guys replaced lead paint that's peeling off and creating major issues. Any look at sound control?
Honestly, I'm not aware we have. I mean, certainly we can take a look at, which we do on a frequent basis, the wheel profile of our trains, for example, right? That can create some additional noise, but making sure that we're truing our wheels on a regular basis, which we do, that's something we can look at. But let me go back and talk to the team and see. I mean, obviously, trains are noisy in some respects, but we can look to see if there's something we can do.
Sure. And finally, going back to CBTC, last question is, are there any barriers to implementation that prevent a full rollout of CBTC signals to the whole subway system?
Are there any barriers to that?
Yep.
Not that I'm aware of. I think the question is, as we said, is sort of the trade-off of time versus keeping, service running. So, I mean, that would be our desire. We know our signal systems are antiquated, and, in some is from the Eisenhower or first Roosevelt administration. I think in some instances that might be slight exaggeration, but no, not that I'm aware of.
And good question. While you're implementing this, there's obviously impacts on the service that President Davies implementing. Right. So that's always the trade-off, but it's money and time availability. And the 7 train that you lived through, when there was a lot of suffering, right? And then there's the ability to run that much more service, and we frequently use that as an example as we go out to these other lines now, and including the G train. So, but that's the short of it.
Got it. Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Sorry for my detour on the 7 line.
That was definitely a detour. And next we'll have Majority Leader Patigas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. So in your testimony, you speak about frequencies being improved on 8 subway lines, including mine, the 6 train, which is great. We love to hear that, and I hope my constituents watching see the good work we're doing in increasing frequencies. But I just wanted to follow up on that a bit and ask, how do either the frequencies improving on these lines or just generally the wait times comparatively to last year? Can we talk about those comparisons and how they're improving?
Sure. So typically where we're adding service is midday, nights, and weekends, right? So the 6 has pretty good frequency during rush hour in particular, and I think what we're hearing from our customers in particular is the concerns of adding more service during those times. And so on average, we're adding 2, 3, sometimes 4 minutes are reducing. So for a 10, 12-minute wait time, that's pretty significant, right? So, I mean, that's what we're seeing. You know, truthfully, in particular for the R, we've had some challenges because we have work trains coming out of Coney Island for some of that direct track fixation work we're doing. So that should clear up in the next couple of weeks. But overall, we've been pretty pleased with what we've been able to offer midday, nights, and weekends. Weekends in particular, where we've seen ridership come back, relatively speaking, even stronger than weekdays.
Okay, and so the improving frequencies by 20 to 25%, you're saying that's over the last year? Or what's the time frame of comparing that?
Yes,
to
over
what?
the last year. So we started, once the budget was completed, we started these rollouts last summer. And then what we do is our employees pick their work every quarter. And so we made those adjustments, you know, as those, quote, picks came out.
Great, and then just really quickly on capital projects, were any impacted or halted by PEGs or the capital plan at all?
Were any halted by?
Like halted, prevented, or like if there's any PEGs or any adjustments in the budget? Or are things going accordingly? Like, for example, I have my ADA conversion happening right now in Parkchester.
I mean, anything that is in construction, no.
Okay.
But because of the delay in congestion pricing, we have delayed projects that that we're unsure of whether or not we'll have the dollars. Signaling system, ADA projects, a whole host of projects, unfortunately. But anything that's in construction now, no. That is continuing.
Including Penn Station access
Okay.
and the 4 new stations.
Great.
Yes.
I was going to follow up on that. Thank you. And then I wanted to ask about agency-to-agency reporting on real-time bus data. So I know we track our buses in real time for the various apps that we have to inform riders when the buses are oncoming or when they're delayed, et cetera.
Right.
I had a constituent have an incident where they could not find a way to report the exact time of when an incident occurred to the agency that they were calling 911. Like, they were on the phone with 911, and 911 could not actually, they didn't have the real-time data of where the bus was going. And so a consistent update needed to happen. And so I was just wondering, and I'm looking into this actually legislatively as well, is there a way that we are communicating to emergency personnel, like to emergency services, or is there a way that we're keeping our real-time bus data overlapped with maybe 911, fire, EMS?
Sure. I mean, we can certainly have that conversation in our rail control center. We have, for example, from the subway side, we have a dedicated police officer and a dedicated firefighter sitting there. So if there's an issue in the subway system, we have that sort of real-time connection. I mean, obviously those services have the ability to look at our, you know, at our publicly available data on an app. But no, we can have that conversation to see if we can improve communication with 911 or others with our bus, for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that a bit more offline as I'm like policy-wise trying to think about this, because I do think we're already investing a ton of money to keep these applications going and best ways to serve our cities. So would love to take that conversation offline. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, Majority Leader. And my absolute last question, and then we will be done.
For today.
Yes, for today. Thank you. Is about distribution of FHB surcharge receipts. So the MTA 20 to 24 to 27 adopted financial plan includes FHB surcharge receipts of $375 million in 2024, $387 million in 2025, that grows to $401.2 million by 2027. Of that amount, $50 million is reserved for the outer borough transportation account items. Can you describe for the committee how the outer borough account came to exist, how it is utilized, and can you identify for the committee some of the key projects funded in calendar year 2024? And can you also share some details on how those projects were selected?
So I can start with some of the things that I know. 2023 was the first year that the outer borough account reached about $49 million. And the outer borough account was through the legislation that created the surcharge for the 96th Street. required that the first $300 million would go to the Subway Action Plan. The next $50 million would be dedicated to the outer borough transportation account, and then anything above $350 would go back to the transportation fund account to fund transit projects. The $50 million, I think there is part of the legislation said how we would spend the money. Through the actual state and the legislature, they actually sign off on projects. And so I think what we saw was that in 2024, there was $22 million dedicated for rebates on 2 of the bridges for that funding. The remaining of the $50 million has not been decided of how it would be allocated to the outer boroughs.
So it has not been decided yet. And just to clarify, you're saying that the state legislatures, they are the ones that sign off on what the projects are based on the legislation.
That is my understanding.
That's correct. It's similar to how the capital program works, so it's the designees on that board would approve an expense.
And has the MTA put in anything for the remaining amount? Any projects?
Not to date, but we would work with the state legislature to come up with different projects beyond what was already in there for the Henry Hudson Bridge and the Cross Bay.
Cross Bay, yeah.
It'd be great to see, $3 to $10 million for EIS for Queenslink. It sounds like you got a little bit of change left over there. In calendar years 2022 and 2023, actual receipts for the outer borough transportation account items again, were $37.3 million, bless you, and $51.8 million respectively to date. How many outer borough projects have been funded out of this account, and where are some of these projects located? I know you mentioned Cross Bay, so that's one, but what else?
It's just those 2 rebate programs so far. So the first year, we only, as you stated, in 2022, there was only $37 million. We didn't want to dedicate any funding if we weren't, we were unsure if we were reaching $50 million, so you don't want to overcommit any funding. So that was the first time we actually saw the account get any funding above the $300 million that's dedicated to the Subway Action Plan. And then because we got I think you updated me, I said $49 million, $51 million in 2023. So we are starting to spend that $51 million for the rebates.
Which I'm in support of those programs, just for the record. Just wanted to understand how you are prioritizing the excess beyond that. And thank you for coming out, for your patience with us today, and your thorough and thoughtful answers, and looking forward to following up on some components. I think you have an outstanding answer for me as it pertains to the reporting with the stops.
Yeah, and the answer is yes, we will be reporting those out. We have not accumulated something yet, but those will be reported out.
Thank you.
And one last thing, I just want to thank you, Chair, for we've been sending over job openings, and there are more and more. We have an open bus operator exam, and these are good paying jobs, and we appreciate that you and your team and other council members are putting the word out, and people are applying for those jobs.
Yes, keep the flyers
which can
coming.
Keep the trains running.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take 5 minutes before we start the next section.